boss battles, easily one of my favourite conventions in gaming. Whether they're challenging, memorable, emotional, or just plain awesome, they make for a good change of pace in any video game. Despite this though, there are bosses which are quite lacking in these categories, and today we'll be going through my top 10 worst boss battles. There are 3 main rules for this list. Number 1, only one boss per franchise. 2, they have to be bosses from games I've played. So if a particular boss you don't like isn't on this list, it's either because 1, I didn't find it as bad as you did, or number 2, I simply haven't played the game. And 3, these bosses are mostly based around bad design. This depends on if they're unfair, frustrating, pathetically easy, or just suck. Also, there will be a lot of spoilers on this list, including some from a game which came out recently this year, so be warned. Now, let's get started. Albert Wesker might be one of the most iconic game villains ever, but the final fight with him in Resident Evil 5 isn't that great though. Not the first half, because it's actually the best fight in the game due to the strategy used to defeat him, although because of Cheryl's terrible AI, seeing her use the rocket launcher is the equivalent of seeing a toddler use a gun. Anyway, what I'm talking about is the second half of the fight, when he becomes Ouroboros Wesker. Firstly, he's just really a beefed up version of mutated Krauser from Resident Evil 4, but not as fun. Secondly, he just rambles on about how the human race needs judgment. Basically your stereotypical villain speech, which gets a bit annoying after a while.
The human race requires judgment! You're going to judge us? You get all your ideas from comic book villains?
Lastly, there's barely any ammo to help you in this fight, and linking in with this, his attacks can cause quite a bit of damage, and not to mention the atmosphere of the battle really doesn't fit the Resident Evil series. Also, it's just me, or isn't it a massive coincidence that a stealth bomber crashes into a volcano, it doesn't sink into the lava and everyone aboard it survives?
Coincidence? I think not!
Besides from that, Wesker just seemed to be a cliched villain in Resident Evil 5 compared to the previous games, from what I hear. Hopefully his son will be a much more interesting character in Resident Evil 6.
Does he know that Wesker was my father?
While the build up to the fight with Pope Rodrigo in Assassin's Creed 2 was pretty good, the final result was quite underwhelming. The first part of the fight involves you fighting the Pope with 4 clones at your side, and even though he can block your attacks, depending on what weapon you're using, weirdly you can easily take him down with your fists. Yeah, that's great gameplay design right there, Ubisoft. Very balanced. Not. The next half involves you and Pope Rodrigo having a one-on-one fist fight. During this fight, all you really have to do is spam the same grab, punch, kick combo over and over again, although it does get quite repetitive because of how much health he has. On the other hand, the reason why this fight is quite low on this list is seeing Ezio taking on the Pope in a one-on-one fist fight is quite amusing for some reason. Still, it is quite a lame fight, although the ending does make up for it. After the reign of films such as the Twilight series and Red Riding Hood, it seems that Lycans are portrayed in a negative manner. However, in terms of video games, they seem to get a good amount of respect in titles such as BlazBlue and the underrated Castlevania Lords of Shadow. What? I like that game! Despite this, however, the Sharmans in MadWorld are a completely different story. This boss, or rather bosses, come in the form of a pack of wolves. The problem with this fight is that the wolves seem to gang up on you constantly while the pack leader runs to safety in a cowardly manner, and it's quite hard to track each pack member and the leader due to the game's poor camera. The leader itself is quite tough because of the amount of health he has, and he also has an attack in which the pack forms a giant cartwheel which can cause a high amount of damage if hit. Overall, this fight is just irritating and uninteresting. At least how you kill the boss is pretty cool. Now that's what I call taking the dog for a walk. Never mind, forget I said that. I can easily say that Dark Souls is the best RPG of this generation in my opinion. One of the reasons being the boss battles. Besides from being memorable, they offer a perfect challenge, such as the fights with Great Wolf Sith and the troublesome duo Ornstein and Smurf.
Oh shit, it looks like we got a new fighter. Yo Smogs! Get in here! What's up, pals?
There is one boss, however, which seems to throw the game's idea of punishing yet fair difficulty out of the window. Behold, the Bed of Chaos. Rather than fighting the boss head on, it's more of a puzzle. This puzzle involves you running to each side of the boss, hitting 2 orbs, and then going into its chest to deal the finishing blow. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Well, it's the complete opposite of that. For starters, the boss has a hard to dodge attack where it swipes its arms across the arena, which is near impossible to avoid because of how big they are. The floor also begins to fall apart during the fight, and if you fall through the holes, it's instant death. When you destroy these orbs, the boss gains more attacks, such as using a pair of giant death scythe arms and sprouting fire from the ground, which is also quite hard to avoid. When you finally go into the chest of the boss, you're greeted with a weird slug-like creature which takes 1 hit to kill. Are you serious? I mean, you go through all of that just to kill a slug. The fight as a whole just seems really unsatisfying and annoying due to the boss's hard to avoid attacks and what awaits you at the end of the fight. There is one good point though. Super fun happy slide! Whee! Final Fantasy XIII is easily one of the most disappointing games I've ever played. Besides from the linearity and the presence of Vanille, another reason for the game's disappointment was with the boss fights. These just felt unfair and weren't fun at all, partially due to the paradigm system and the fact that they would cast doom on you if you were too slow to kill them. In my opinion, the worst of these bosses are both phases of the game's final boss, Orphan. Starting with the first phase, right at the beginning of the fight, Orphan will use its special move, Merciless Judgment, which causes a high amount of damage depending on what paradigms you have, and if you don't have the right paradigms, then you're screwed. Besides from that, Orphan's attacks can be quite powerful and dangerous, such as a laser attack which not only causes massive damage, but can also cause status alignments. Orphan can also heal itself every now and again. I will give credit to Square that the design is creative, and the battle theme playing in the background during the fight, Born Anew, is one of my favourite Final Fantasy boss themes ever. That all changes with the second form though. After you defeat the first form of Orphan, you get a pretty good cutscene, which could have made for a pretty dark ending. Afterwards, you then fight the second form of Orphan, which is literally the son from Teletubbies. Well, we might as well have the theme song playing in the background while we're at it, shall we? On a serious note, is this the best design Square could come up with? Also, the boss is quite easy, which is quite underwhelming after fighting a pretty tough boss beforehand, because I was expecting something slightly tougher. All you really need to do is fill the stagger meter to its limit and then go all out. Quite simple, really. What a fitting way to end such a disappointing game than with a disappointing final boss. Warning: the next segment contains spoilers for Ninja Gaiden 3, which came out earlier this year. I will say that this game is the weakest in the series, but Ninja Gaiden 3 wasn't that bad. Yes, it was annoying that there was a lack of multiple weapons and the graphics aren't as good as previous games, but I thought that the story was easily the best out of the three, because it was something different other than killing a bunch of random demons. And the multiplayer was pretty cool, despite feeling tacked on and only having 3 levels to play in. Moving back on topic, the bosses in this game felt quite unmemorable though. It seemed that Team Ninja were trying to make them quite mainstream, such as the fight with Obaba. Out of these bosses, my choice for the number 5 spot goes to the battle with Higgins. Here's a little backstory on this guy. He's a scientist working for the Japanese self-defense force, but he then betrays you later on in the game, revealing that he actually works for the LOA organization. Although it was quite a predictable twist, this guy is someone that would make a good boss because of his treacherous nature. Looks like I'm about to fight him. Let's see what he's got. Really? Is that the best Team Ninja could come up with for this fight? At least for Orphan's second form, Square put some slight thought into it. Here, the boss looks really unimaginative and bland. As for the fight itself, it's okay I suppose, but it feels very unmemorable and boring. All you do is partake in the same quick time event after dealing a few hits to the boss over and over again. Halfway through the fight, he begins to fly around the area, and you would think to use your bow. But he then takes it away from you. This leads you to having to take down a group of enemies just to enable you to use the grip of murder technique to attack Cliff head on. This makes the fight even more repetitive and forgettable. Not to mention, this guy is the third to last boss in the game. Compare him to the third to last boss of the second game, and this fight is easily inferior. That fight had awesome music, a badass looking boss, and most importantly, it was frantic yet fun. This fight lacks all of those key elements. Hopefully we'll get better bosses in Ninja Gaiden Sigma 3 and 4 if Team Ninja get their heads in gear.
Let the final battle begin!
Actually, I have to agree with Rabid Luigi on this one. Jasper Bat Jr. isn't the worst boss in the No More Heroes series. I can see why everyone hates him, but Jasper was made intentionally to parody an anticlimactic fight. And linking in with what Rabid said in his list, this fight also shows that at the end of the day revenge isn't really worth it. I can agree on one thing with the haters though, that his second phase is absolutely annoying as hell. But at least that fight was better than the fight with Millie and Gunman from the same game. First off, this guy is incredibly bland and he has no backstory whatsoever, so we know zilch about him, and he feels like a lame version of Dr. Peace, who was pretty interesting, and coincidentally the 9th rank from the first game. As for the fight itself, all you do is chase him around while he runs away from you, travelling around the arena via a series of lifts. The terrible platforming and dodgy camera really don't help because of how poorly they play out. Depending on how long you take with particular combos, he shoots you right in the face, which deals quite a bit of damage and is near impossible to avoid. Now let's not forget those annoying one-liners from this guy. Okay, let's not go down that route. At the end of the day, in my personal opinion, I think that Gunman is the worst boss in the No More Heroes series because of his lack of creativity and annoying fight. But he isn't as bad when compared with the top 3 on this list. Personally, I'm not that interested in the Oddworld games. They don't look like my cup of tea. I have played one game in the series, and that was Oddworld Stranger's Wrath. It was a pretty good take on the FPS genre in terms of having to use animals as live ammo, along with a number of platforming segments. The boss fights were also surprisingly good, with an interesting tactical feel, where you could kill them or bring them into jail, similar to a western, in order to gain Maluha, the game's currency. Later on in the game, we were given one of the weirdest plot twists I have ever seen in a video game. I'll let the cutscene do the talking because it's quite hard to explain with words.
Hold it. What the hell's he up? What you hiding, freak boy? Go! Get them pants off! Is that what I think it is? It's a goddamn Steve! He ain't been hiding his legs! Got no horns!
This plot twist slightly alters the gameplay as well, such as the change of locations. I feel that although the twist was surprising, the game goes slightly downhill near the end because it just begins to feel like a regular shooter where you walk down a linear path and kill any enemy in sight. Another reason is the final battle with the game's antagonist, Secto. To start things off, he sends 2 squid-like creatures to take you down. They can fire goo at you, which can easily trap you if you're not careful, but that's not even the worst part though. Here's a clip from 4Player Podcast to explain what I mean.
Fucking Christ. Look at this, I still cannot move, 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 dead. Thank you very much. This fucking game is stupid, dude.
When I look at this clip and my experience with this part of the fight, I just want to say, didn't anyone test it? When this happens, it is literally impossible to avoid this attack because these bosses don't give you a single chance to move at all. Marvelous gameplay design right there. Afterwards, we get to fight Secto himself, and this is what we get. While it's definitely not a pain in the ass like the previous part, it feels quite underwhelming. All you have to do is keep hiding in cover and shooting at the shield generators operating Secto's machine, and that's it. You could at least put him in a robot suit, cliched I know, but what would be even more interesting or even better, make him feel like a brute by making us fight him head on against his melee attacks. Sadly, these ideas seem to be ignored or discarded in favour of this. While the game is quite underrated, the final battle failed to satisfy, and judging from the game's sales, it looks like we're not getting Stranger's Wrath 2 anytime soon. Our Deus Ex Human Revolution. Despite being one of my favourite games of last year, this game is a prime example of how not to do a boss fight. Out of all of these fights, I have to go with the third boss, Jaren Namir. Before I begin ranting, I have to admit that the gimmick used for this fight was pretty interesting. At one point in the game, your augmentations begin glitching out, and it's recommended that you have to get the newest biochip upgrade in order to prevent these glitches from happening again. At a cost, however, it is revealed that this was part of Zhao's plan. and due to this your augments are disabled, making the fight significantly harder. While it's a cool idea, it can be slightly frustrating to put up with, but that's not my main problem with this fight. It's the fact that it's really unbalanced. To begin with, it can be really hard, but then depending on how you upgrade yourself or what tactics you use, it becomes disappointingly easy. I could have put any other bosses from this game on this list, but I chose this boss due to my personal experience. After being killed numerous times since I took the chip, I just spammed this guy with remote control mines, grenades and bullets, and he didn't even move out of the spot he starts at. Or luckily, if he didn't take the chip, unlike me, you could just turn invisible, run up to him and punch him in the face. Fight over. Linking in with this, it was revealed in an interview that the main reason why the boss fights sucked in this game was because they were developed by a different studio instead of Eidos Montreal, which apparently only had experience with shooters and never heard about the reputation of the Deus Ex franchise. What a surprise! In conclusion, I think this single quote sums up the bosses in this game very well.
I never asked for this.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Before we get to number 1, here's a quick recap. Number 10, Ouroboros Wesker. Number 9, Hope Rodrigo. Number 8, the Sharmans. Number 7, the Bed of Chaos. Number 6, the Sunken Teletubbies. Number 5, Mr. Uninspired. Number 4, Mr. Uninspired Senior. Number 3, Still Cannot Move. And number 2, Jaron Namir. To me, Ghost Hunter for the PlayStation 2 is one of the most underrated games of all time. It had some really fun gameplay, good writing and enjoyable characters, one of which being the game's antagonist Hawksmoor, voiced by Dumbledore himself, Michael Gambon. Despite all of this though, near the end of the game, it seems like the developers slightly rushed the end game, due to the lack of puzzles seen in the final level and the final battle with Hawksmoor himself. My first problem is not necessarily the fight, but the build up to it. When you finally find Hawksmoor, you're betrayed by your ally, Professor Richmond, who had made a deal with Hawksmoor, and due to that deal, Lazarus, the game's protagonist, is then killed. The game doesn't end there though, since it decides to pull a Bayonetta. In the next sequence, you're seen playing as a giant robot. I kid you not. A game about hunting ghosts, and there's a segment where you play as a giant robot. This is really out of place, and although I like giant robots and all, like I said before, this really doesn't fit at all, and it kind of kills the serious tone. Going back on topic, the main problem is the actual fight. Once Lazarus is saved, you have to fight Hawksmoor himself, and it's a pretty poor fight. All you're doing throughout the fight is taking down waves and waves of enemies while dodging Hawksmoor's plasma orb attacks. After a while, you have to take down Hawksmoor himself, and all he does is fly around the area, using the same attack over and over again. This is a main piece of evidence that the game was rushed, because why doesn't he have any more attacks besides that plasma orb attack? When I finally took him down, I was pretty disappointed because of how quickly it took to defeat him, which was quite anticlimactic. That's a bad sign showing how easy this boss is, not to mention that the ending you get after this disappointing battle isn't that great either.
What kind of shit ending is that?
Overall, this fight is easily the worst boss I've ever fought in a video game due to the out of place build up and how pathetically easy the fight itself was. I wonder how Michael Gambon felt when he saw his character's wasted potential.
Please.
Just kidding, he probably wouldn't care anyway as long as he gets paid. I'm alabzam, and Hawksmoor from Ghost Hunter is in my opinion the worst boss fight I've ever encountered in a video game.
call that a knife? This is a knife. Ooh, down I go.